It's well known that Marvel wasn't always as successful as they are now with the MCU, so much so that they had to sell hundreds of characters to various companies and studios to stay in business, one of which was Spider-Man.
A thief! A criminal! He stole my suit! He's a menace to the entire city! I want that wall-crawling arachnid prosecuted! I want him strung up by his web! I want Spider-Man!
Spider-Man was created by writer-editor Stan Lee and writer-artists Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby, debuting in 1962 in Amazing Fantasy issue 15. This new character broke new ground as teenage heroes were meant to be sidekicks, allowing those of a similar age to relate. This has helped him become one of the most popular and well-recognized comic book figures of all time, appearing in comic books, TV shows, films, cartoons, musicals, and as action figures, becoming the most profitable superhero of all time. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at Big Screen Movies for my initial thoughts and reviews of the latest movies and TV shows. If you want more in-depth thoughts as well as sneak previews for my latest videos, follow me on TikTok, the link is in the description. Marvel optioned up their comics to studios throughout the 70s through to the 90s. Spider-Man was picked up in the late 1970s, but the rights automatically returned to Marvel since a film wasn't made in the allotted time period. Columbia Pictures Television edited and released packaged episodes of the 70s The Amazing Spider-Man TV show for theatrical release internationally. Other than this, Spider-Man stayed firmly in development hell, with various companies such as Canon Films and MGM trying to get theatrical ventures off the ground. If these ventures would have worked out, coming to a cinema near you would be the famous James Cameron take on the web slinger, one of the director's reported biggest regrets. Marvel Entertainment and NBC Universal signed a deal in 1994, allowing Universal Studios the rights to use the characters in theme parks as long as they were used in certain geographical areas. Universal created a whole land of Marvel characters at Universal Orlando, with Marvel not able to use superheroes from any of the specific franchises that are already represented in Universal Orlando in theme parks east of the Mississippi River. Universal, however, can't use any Marvel characters in theme parks west of the river, allowing Marvel free reign in California. In 1995, Marvel reported its first annual loss under Ronald Perelman after being sold to McAndrews and Forbes Holdings 6 years previously for $82.5 million. On December 27, 1996, the Marvel group of companies filed for bankruptcy protection. Toy Biz and Marvel Entertainment Group were merged into Marvel Enterprises to bring it out of bankruptcy on June 2, 1998. The same year, with no movie studio of their own just yet, Marvel sold Spider-Man to Sony for a reported $7 million. It wasn't the only character to be sold to a studio, with X-Men, Daredevil, the Hulk, Ghost Rider, and Iron Man to name just a few, all being sold at some point in a bid to get them on screen and earn some money. MGM traded its stake in the rights of Spider-Man in a negotiation to Sony. Through Columbia Pictures, Sony was now ready to take a spin with Peter Parker at the movies. The deal between Marvel Entertainment Group and Sony meant that the studio could produce as many Spider-Man films as they wanted, as Sony got the film and merchandise rights, while Marvel kept the comic book rights. The deal stipulates that Sony keeps the rights to Spider-Man as long as they continue to produce a Spider-Man movie at least every 5 years, which they have managed to do as of yet. If this video isn't your cup of tea, check out this recap of all the live-action Spider-Man movies, or perhaps this recap of Hawkeye's journey in the MCU so far, or maybe John Kreese's complete Karate Kid and Cobra Kai timelines. Development began on what would become Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy in '99, with Tobey Maguire in the lead role of Peter Parker. 3 years later, we would get to see our first proper look at Spider-Man on the big screen, changing the comic book world forever. From 2002 to 2007, 3 movies were made, grossing $2.5 billion worldwide. Whilst not as critically loved, Spider-Man 3 was closing in on $1 billion, making a fourth movie a guarantee. The plan was to star Vulture with potential appearances from Black Cat and Mysterio. However, it became clear the movie was not going to happen, with the studio seemingly wanting to move on and Sam Raimi not happy with the script. And so, in 2010 they went into immediate reboot mode with Mark Webb's The Amazing Spider-Man. The two films eventually made were weighed down from heavy criticism, despite a generous box office gross, with Sony cancelling all plans of spin-offs and sequels, such as The Sinister Six. In 2009, Disney purchased Marvel for $4 billion. This meant they still had the rights to Spider-Man's portrayal in the comics, but Sony retained the rights on the big screen. In 2011, Sony sold the full merchandising rights back to Marvel, when suffering significant financial losses at the time. Sony experienced a large-scale email hack, where it was discovered there were early talks between Sony and Marvel taking place just 7 months after the release of the latest Spider-Man movie. 1 year later, it was confirmed Spider-Man would indeed be joining the MCU, after a deal was made between studios, debuting in 2016's Captain America: Civil War. The deal got Disney the use of Spider-Man in their films, while Sony got Kevin Feige's involvement and the leverage of the MCU to produce solo films with the same character, giving 5% of the profits to Marvel. Sony chairman Michael Linton said, "This is the right decision for the franchise, for our business, for Marvel, and for the fans. The deal means that Sony has creative control, marketing, and distribution, while Marvel produces its own Spider-Man movies that involve him with other superheroes owned by Disney." This run continued for a few years, with Tom Holland portraying the web-slinger in 2 of his own movies and 2 other Avengers movies. Trying to capitalize on his success, Sony moved forward with their own Spider-Man villain universe, with Kevin Feige, head of Marvel Studios, denying their involvement with the MCU. In August 2019, Deadline reported that a halt in communication between Disney and Sony had ended Marvel Studios and Kevin Feige's involvement in Spider-Man. The disagreement happened due to the extent of how future Spider-Man films would be co-financed, whether or not this still would be applied to Spider-Man spin-offs not included in the MCU, and last but not least, producers' credits. Disney reportedly were looking for a bigger share in Spider-Man movie profits, in turn for the continued involvement of Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios in creating Sony's biggest grossing Spidey movies. With Disney already owning the merch rights, Sony were hesitant to give up half of the film profits via the movies also, resulting in Disney pulling out of the agreement. In September, however, it was announced that Tom Holland as Spider-Man would return for a 3rd film in the Homecoming series, Spider-Man: No Way Home. With the amount of backlash they received from fans finding out Spider-Man was leaving the MCU and a phone call from Spider-Man himself, Tom Holland, to Bob Iger, Disney and Sony restarted negotiations, agreeing on 2 more films featuring Spider-Man. So, as of right now, if Spider-Man appears in the comics, he is owned by Marvel. If Spider-Man appears in merch, he is owned by Marvel. If Spider-Man appears at theme parks, it depends geographically between Marvel and Universal. If Spider-Man appears in the films, he is owned by Sony, with an unknown percentage of the profits going to Marvel whilst within the MCU.